Government is a lot of things. At worst, it binds and controls a society, imposing rule that restricts free expression and movement. At best, it empowers a great society to do great things. It lifts all its constituents and provides a playing field for all members to play with equal chance of success. One thing is for sure, though, government in a great society like that of the United States of America is layered and complex to the point where we don't always understand who is doing what and for what reason. When I was a kid in school, we still had civics class, not history or even something like Problems in American Democracy, which I took later on in high school, but basic civics, classes that taught you what the different parts of our government were for and what role they played in your day-to-day life. I remember having a mock trial in 8th grade, all the way through jury selection, and it prepared me for when that summons showed up for the first time by making the process familiar and less intimidating. So for today's podcast, I have the privilege of talking with an elected official from the County of Los Angeles who runs a department that all of us who live here come into contact with, yet probably don't fully understand the scope of what they do for us. Since this department lives in every county in every state across the union, there's a good chance you came across them as well. I'm an info nerd, right? And learning about all kinds of stuff like how the individual departments in our county government work is really one of my biggest relief valves. And when my kids refer to me as useless knowledge man, I'm quick to point out that it's only useless till you need it. Jeff Prang was elected in 2014 as the 27th assessor for the County of Los Angeles and re-elected again in 2018. Raised in Warren, Michigan, Assessor Prang is a graduate of Michigan State University. After graduation, Mr. Prang relocated to California, where he served nearly 18 years as a council member for the city of West Hollywood, including 4 terms as mayor, among many other positions in his public sector career. Assessor Prang is a State Board of Equalization licensed appraiser and administers the largest office of its kind in the nation, with 1,300 employees that provide the foundation for a property tax system that generates over $17 billion annually. My guest today is Jeff Prang. Jeff, how does one address the county assessor? Is it the Honorable Jeff Prang?
So interesting question. I've actually thought about that from time to time. So whenever you're dealing with elected officials, whether it is a school board member, a member of the legislature or Congress, if you're writing a letter or if you're introducing them, they will generally say, like the Honorable Eric Garcetti, Mayor of the City of Los Angeles. Some people now will say we're glad to be joined today by Honorable Garcetti, which is inappropriate. It's not a title. It's kind of a courtesy that's extended. I just like to have people call me Jeff.
Cool. Well, Jeff, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to talk with me for a little bit today. Can you tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do?
So I am the Los Angeles County Assessor, a job that virtually nobody really understands. Everybody thinks they know what I do, and most of them are wrong. So I'll tell you a little bit about the job. The job of county assessor is one of 3 countywide elective offices. The other 2 are much, much more known than mine, and that's the sheriff and the district attorney. But the county has 3 elected officials, the assessor, the DA, and the sheriff. I am responsible for the valuation of all taxable property in the county. And taxable property includes something we all think of naturally, and that's land and buildings. It also includes what we call business personal property, which might mean furniture, equipment, and machinery. And our job is to establish the fair market value of that property under the laws established by Prop 13.
Okay.
And I'm responsible for producing what's called the assessment roll. And the assessment roll is really just a fancy way of referring to the inventory of all property in the county, which is on the tax rolls.
That's really interesting. As a technology manager for many years, I've always been involved in budgeting and purchasing equipment and making sure that things are properly written off the books when they've reached their end of life and that kind of thing. And I never realized that it was your office that sets the tax valuation of those kind of assets.
So it's every year the businesses that you worked for would probably get from us a business property statement where they would declare the value, the depreciation, and pay a property tax on that, which is 1%, just like it is on real property, land and buildings. And some of the things that, in addition to business equipment, that fall under that category also include aircraft, both commercial aircraft like planes at LAX, general aviation aircraft, boats, motorhomes of a certain age, and one of the more interesting ones, we even assess racehorses.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So one of the big misconceptions that people have about my office is that people always ask me if I have a finance degree to be the assessor, but we're not a finance office. That's not what we do. We are essentially, our core function is real estate appraisal. So, so just a few stats about my office. I run the largest local property assessment agency in the United States. We've got about 1,300 employees in 6 different offices. We're responsible for establishing the value for 2.5 million real property parcels and about 350,000 business assessments annually, which last year were valued at $1.7 trillion.
Wow.
That's the assessed value. The market value is very much higher. So about half of our employees are real estate appraisers. And we train them to be an appraiser. You have to have a bachelor's degree. We do all the training in-house. It's about a year to 2 year program. People start off valuing, tract homes, residential homes, and graduate up over the years into doing complex commercial properties like the new SoFi Stadium, which is and oil refineries, some really complex pieces of property.
Sure. Was this what you thought you would be doing when you started out and went on to college?
It is not. It was nowhere on my radar screen, but I did have fairly early in my career in government and politics exposure to this office. Back in 1990, my mid to late 20s, I met a guy who was running to be the county assessor, and his name was Kenneth P. Hahn. No relationship to the supervisor, Kenny Hahn, although they have the same name. And I helped him on his campaign, and but a year or two later, after he got elected, he offered me a job as a staff assistant in the assessor's office. So after I left his service, he put me on the assessor's community advisory board. And almost 30 years later, I ended up back in the office and in a position to run for assessor in 2014.
Okay. What was it always your goal to be in politics when you were coming up?
It has, since I was very young. I was always fascinated with government and politics. I always knew that I wanted to work in government at one level or another. And when I was I'm from Michigan, and I attended Michigan State University, which is right next to the Capitol. And while I was there, I did an internship at the Capitol. I even ran for city council in my hometown of Warren, Michigan. I think I was maybe 19 or 20 years old. I got clobbered. Didn't know what I was doing, but by the time I was done, I actually was kind of a weathered veteran by that point, and learned a lot in running that losing campaign. But when I came to California in the late 80s, I got involved in campaigns and politics, and was hired to work on the staff of a number of elected officials, including not only Assessor Kenny Hahn, but I worked for Los Angeles Council Member Ruth Galanter for a number of years. And then prior to being assessor, I served for almost 18 years as the city council member in West Hollywood, including 4 terms as mayor.
Oh, so that must have been an interesting set of challenges as well, as the executive for the city.
West Hollywood is obviously, it's a pretty notable community. City council jobs are really the boots on the ground level of government that people relate to. It's where most people interact with government. Roads and parks and libraries are all city business. And West Hollywood, it's a moderate-sized city, about 35,000 people. But West Hollywood has a huge international presence. We're the host of a number of the Oscar awards, and has a very engaged electorate. And even
Right.
though now as assessor, I represent LA County, 4,500 square miles, 11 million people, but I think there's a whole lot more glamour being the mayor of West Hollywood than there is being the county property
Cer-
tax assessor.
Certainly in the day-to-day contact with your constituents, I'm sure. Though now technically they're all your constituents as well, just in a different way.
But most people just don't know what we do. When I was on the city council, I used to joke. I kept office hours when I went to Ralph's or Pavilions because people would see you and they recognize you and they'd
Yeah.
talk about the issues on the street, their neighborhood, whatever it was. It was hard to get to be out in public without having somebody come up and ask you questions or offer some constructive criticism about the way things run. But most people are not really aware of what the assessor does. Probably the most important confusion that people have is people think that I do taxes. In fact, they modify my title. They all the time call me the tax assessor. And to the best of my knowledge, that is a non-existent title in the United States. I have not been able to find a jurisdiction where they have a position called tax assessor. And it's in
Okay.
California, it's incorrect because we have an assessor who assesses
Right.
the value of property. And then we have a totally different department headed by a different person called the treasurer tax collector. And I always joke. I said, there's
Okay.
another guy who collects taxes. He's got a very intuitive title. He's called the tax collector. Easy to differentiate between that department and ours. We are related. If I can, just to give you a
Yeah,
quick
please.
explanation of how it works. So if you buy a house, you record a deed with the registrar recorder. Or if you do new
Mhm.
construction, like adding a second floor to your home, you get a permit from the city. Well, the city sends
Right.
us those permits, the registrar recorder sends us the deeds, and those become work orders for us. And we then send out an appraiser to determine the value, which we then enroll on the assessment roll. And that's where our work
Okay.
stops. That information is turned over to another department that people don't know about called the auditor controller. They're the ones that assign all the tax rates. So they're the ones basically
Okay.
telling what you're going to pay. And then they turn that data over to the treasurer tax collector who mails bills and collects the payments. So there's a multitude of departments that are involved. I'm the only one of those departments that is headed by an elected official. And so most people are more aware of my department than the others, and I'm held essentially accountable for all the
Right.
responsibilities that are in somebody else's department. But we do try
Right.
to handle them, even if they're not technically our department's responsibility.
The price of fame. Does your department feed up into any other part of the state government in any way at all?
So yes, sort of. So the property taxes that are generated from our assessments are all local funds. They go to schools, cities, special districts. The
Right. Okay.
California State Board of Equalization, they have they don't supervise us, but they have an oversight responsibility over all 58 county assessors. They do regular surveys to make sure that our policies and practices are in compliance with state laws and guidelines. They
Okay.
establish standardization of forms and of the implementation of various state statutes so that to ensure that all assessors are doing things the same way. So you're not going to be getting conflicting information from county to county. And
Okay.
the 58 county assessors actually all work very, very closely together. We have 4 or 5 significant meetings annually that focus on standardization in terms of policy and practice, education to ensure our people are getting the right type of information to do their jobs, and to
Okay.
advocate for laws that help us to do our jobs more effectively.
That's really interesting. So ultimately, what prepared you for this role was actually working in the office.
There are 3 significant parts of my career that I think helped prepare me. One was actually
Yeah.
being in the office and understanding what the office does, what its functions are, what the outward facing value is to the public. Because
Okay.
it's an elective office, the Board of Supervisors is responsible for approving my budget, having
Okay.
those many years as a city council member in West Hollywood, understanding the dynamics of how to deal with other elected officials who have different levels of responsibilities was important to ensure that I could, knew how to navigate those waters to be as effective as possible. The one thing I didn't
Okay.
mention previously in my career, I spent 3.5 years as an assistant city manager where I had significant administrative responsibilities over budgetary and programmatic matters. And The assessor is not a policymaker; it's an elected administrator, and that
Okay.
administrative experience was really some of the most valuable experience I had in being prepared for this job.
Okay. How often do you have to stand for election?
Every 4 years. Um,
Okay.
and there are no term limits, which
Okay.
means I can stay as long as I think I can still be valuable, as long as the people will keep me.
Okay. That's cool. How did this particular role become a do you know how did this particular role become an elected
So,
position versus an appointed?
so the California Constitution, which was written more than 100 years ago, provides that the district attorney, the sheriff, and the assessor all need to be elected. I don't know what was going
Okay.
on at that point, um, but there's been discussion about whether any or all three of these positions should be appointed. I think there's good arguments on both sides. I can say that there is one thing about this job where I think being elected is pretty important. I was with this office
Yeah.
as a staff assistant in 1992, 1993, and that was the
Yeah.
first time post Prop 13 that the real estate market crashed and property values went down. Now,
Okay.
under Proposition 13, which is what guides property assessment and taxes in California, um, if the market value of property falls below its assessed value, which is more or less what you
Yeah.
pay for it, you are entitled to pay taxes on the lower of the two. So, for example, if you paid $1
Okay.
million for your house, the market crashes, it's now only worth $500,000. I am constitutionally obligated to lower the assessed value of a property from a million to a half a million, which would save you $5,000 a year on your property taxes.
Okay.
So obviously, if I were to do that, that's going to negatively impact local government revenues. And I was in this office in 1992 and 1993. I was at a much lower level position, obviously, but I remember the anxiety from the assessor, Kenny Hahn, at that time, and his senior
Yeah.
managers, getting a lot of pressure from the board of supervisors and from the chief administrative office not to lower those property values, or at least not to lower them that much. The county was not nearly as judicious with its money back in those days, and
Okay.
those reductions would have had severe impacts on public services. And if the assessor had been appointed, they could have ordered him to artificially inflate those values, which would have been unfair to property owners. It would have been against the
Right.
law as well. But
It's easier to be it's easier to be independent when you're elected by the people instead of being appointed by an executive.
I'm not the tax collector. I'm not responsible for revenues. I am not a revenue agency per se.
Right.
Um, I am supposed to officially be agnostic when it comes to the property value. I don't care whether your value goes up or down. My duty is to enroll the fair and accurate value. That value will determine that you're paying the right amount of taxes. If we
Right.
manipulate that, you're going to pay too much or too little. So when the folks upstairs in this building where we work, if they want to put pressure on an appointed official to support their revenues, that would require an appointed official to treat people unfairly. And I think that
Yeah.
independence for the assessor is still critical.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense. You talked about you had, I think you said 1,500 employees in total in the
Um,
assessor's office.
Roughly between 13 and 1,400, I believe.
Okay.
About half, I think I mentioned about half of those, but 750 are appraisers. We have
Okay.
over 100 IT professionals. We have obviously administrative people who do budget and HR, and we have a number of other
Right.
administrative positions that deal with other programs that we're responsible for. In fact,
Okay.
one of the things that's, speaking of employees, one of the things I'm really excited about, we just this week launched programs with a couple of local community colleges that's going to create a pipeline from the community colleges into LA County government jobs. And government
Oh,
jobs,
excellent.
they've got good pay, really good benefits, and retirement. So we have a class right now over at West LA College of appraiser trainees, where they're learning a lot of the techniques of real estate appraisal. We have a brand new position we call appraiser assistant, and they're over at Rio Hondo College, learning the basic skills to come in as an appraiser assistant, which will then create a pathway for them to matriculate up to a full appraiser. And if you're an appraiser, you can
Nice.
go all the way up to the senior ranks in the department. So anybody can enroll in these college programs. We can't guarantee you a job when you're done, but if you get complete, if you finish it and you pass and can be certified by the Board of Equalization, you have a good chance of getting a job in LA County or any of the other 58 counties in California that hire those positions.
That's very cool. That's excellent. What was it? What was it like for you when COVID came down and you had to shut down things? How did that mess with your life? I know it messed with a lot of us getting sent home and having to work from home. How did it change your business?
Well, the sending people home, we had never done anything like that before. It was really difficult to,
Right.
even though we did it, nobody really quite knew how or what it meant or how long it was going to be or what was going to be involved. And there was a bit of an adjustment. A lot of our employees, particularly the appraisers, when they're at the office, we give them rather robust equipment. Most of them have extra large computer screens. They're double screens, so they can look at maps
Yeah.
and drawings. We didn't have equipment to send home with these employees, so they may be
Mhm.
relying on a small laptop. So moving them from home and ensuring that they had the equipment they needed to do their job was difficult. How to deal with public service, all the people calling or emailing, and obviously you don't have a desktop phone at home, and we have to figure out
Right.
how are we going to deal with people's personal devices.
Yeah.
But it did take a few weeks. I think the employees did like the safety and actually the convenience of being at home.
Yeah.
And we actually were able to get up and running, and our production was able to return to some sense of normalcy in most categories.
Okay. Do you ultimately have plans to pull everybody back into the office? Are you caught in that position where you're trying to find the middle ground where maybe people work 3 days in the office, 2 days at home? How does that apply to a government?
So in LA County, the folks that establish policy for county employees are the board of supervisors and the chief executive office. And so
Okay.
we participate with the 33 other county departments in talking about our needs, priorities, and concerns. There was some sense they're going to try to begin reopening county buildings October 1st. That is not. I don't know if that date is still with us, but I think maybe October or November there might be some
Yeah.
soft openings with some buildings. It is likely that we are going to maintain this modified work schedule where some employees will telework for
Yeah.
the foreseeable future. We don't see. I don't know what your thoughts are, but I'm not seeing a quick end to COVID. It's possible we could have another surge going into the winter months. So we're still going to need to keep people separated.
Yeah.
But but the county did order that all employees have to be vaccinated or they have to meet fairly rigorous standard of testing and while there's exemptions for medical exemptions and religious exemptions, I think those are being hotly debated right now about where the standard will be. We are
Okay.
anticipating that we will probably lose some employees who are not going to meet one of the exemption qualifications and who are pretty insistent that they're not going to get vaccinated.
Hmm. I expected this last surge to come at the end of the summer, not
Mhm.
before the summer. I was kind of surprised at how big the effect that Delta was on the country in general, but even here in LA, I'm disappointed that we don't have a higher vaccination rate than we do. But at the same time, at least people are starting to get better at it, and the numbers seem like they're moving in the right direction. So hopefully, while we're probably going to see a surge in the winter, at least it won't be as bad as certainly nothing could possibly be as bad as it was last winter. That was the most darkest moment of my life watching it happen.
It was pretty demoralizing. I think back now with the Delta variant. I remember in the very early months in March and April of last year, when they were beginning the public education about the need to wear masks, and some
Hmm.
of the experts from the CDC said, right now with this type of virus, we're really dealing with one or two variants. They said the longer this lasts, those variants are going to mutate, and
Yeah.
they will mutate to a more severe degree. So wear your mask now, so we can stop the variants at these two. But now I'm even hearing that there's another variant that's equally as virulent as the
Yeah.
Delta.
We have to get it under control as quickly as we can, because otherwise at some point it may affect the effectiveness of the vaccines. That would be terrible. Really, really terrible. Yeah, I've had many conversations with people about why the vaccines happened as quickly as they did, because being someone from technology and engineering, supercomputing capacity is cheap nowadays. Having the human genome already mapped, having supercomputer capacity available relatively inexpensively, it didn't surprise me or worry me that they were able to find the virus quickly and then immediately get on attacking it. But there are so many folks that just didn't understand that we've hit a moment in history where human knowledge and technology might have actually merged at the right place to get us to where we needed to be.
Well, the other thing that I found to be very compelling is that the drug manufacturing industry didn't sit down at the table and said, "Let's come up with some vaccines and invent a vaccine with the onset of COVID." They had just a myriad of platforms that were already looking at a variety of different coronaviruses. There's a
True.
certain foundational elements of coronavirus that can go one of an endless possibility of directions. So, for example,
Yeah.
the J&J shot was built on the format that they use for other types of cold and flu vaccinations. So they were probably already 50% plus or minus
Yeah.
along the way in the development of a vaccine. They just needed to give it the direction to address this specific virus. It was they have
Yeah.
they have a lot of irons in the fire. They just need to pull one out
Yeah.
and hammer it to
Yeah.
the way that they want to look in the end.
Yeah. Best of times and worst of times, right? We hit a moment in history where we were close and we were on our way, and at the same time we still had to deal with it.
Right.
In the time you've been in the office, how long have you served as the assessor now?
So I was elected in December or November of 2014 and reelected
Okay.
in 2018. So I'm in year 7, and
Okay.
um, as I said, there's no term limit, so I am planning to run for reelection next June. Um,
Okay.
we set out we set out a number of very aggressive initiatives to hopefully make the department work better and function better for the public. One of the things I wanted to highlight that I think is maybe interesting for your listeners deals with
Yeah.
technology. So and you're a tech guy, so you'd probably appreciate this. But when I was elected, I inherited what essentially was a 1970s era mainframe green screen DOS-based
Oh,
technology platform.
okay.
We had to get information about property and in our work. We had to access one of a half a dozen different flickering green screen databases that weren't very robust. You had to be trained on how to read all that language. The 2.5 million property parcels in LA County were all still associated with a paper file. So getting
Okay.
even basic information, could take quite a bit of time, hours, in some cases even days. And you had to know what district office of mine where your physical property file was housed, and
So the computer was an index to a whole bunch of files sitting out in storage lockers somewhere for access.
so for part of our work, yes, that was the case. So we actually launched a
Interesting.
very aggressive technology replacement program. We looked at all the existing technology to see what was available off the shelf, and we finally elected
Okay.
to build our system from scratch. And we've got a program with Oracle. It's a 5-phase program. We're at the end of phase 4. Should be done in about a
Okay.
year. We'll be off the mainframe hopefully by the end of this year. But we've already been able to add tremendous amount of functionality. If you look at our website, if you look at our property portal, all this information, which used to be hard to get, is now all available at the tips of your fingers, but just by logging into our website. We digitized all those property files, so now any employee can access those files from any computer.
Nice.
We no longer have to rely on paper files. Um,
Right.
it's It's actually, we've been able to quantify the effectiveness of this because emails and phone calls into our office have somewhat leveled off, which means what that's telling us is that people are getting answers to their own questions without having to call somebody.
Right. That's very cool.
And we focused on putting as much data that we have that's available to the public online, so that increases transparency and usability. And there's another element that maybe it's too much in the weeds, but the way that we're doing it is pretty novel for government. The way government buys things, whether it be cities or schools or the state, um, they call it a design, bid, build model. You kind of figure out what you need, you send out a request for proposal and hire the cheapest bidder. Then they build it. Then
Okay.
they come and plug it in and see if it works. And when it comes to technology, it never works. And so
Yeah.
we actually used a fairly novel approach. It's not novel in private industry. It is a novel in government, but we're using what's called an agile approach to development. We're building it in little small
Mm-hmm.
pieces, and we don't
Yep.
move on from piece one to piece two until that piece checks out. It works the way we intended to. We took some of our people out of production, and we have them on the design team. So end users are helping design the system to make sure it
Yep.
will work the way our employees use it. And what really was revealing about this, which I think is interesting, is that when you look at other government agencies where people get
Mm-hmm.
really frustrated with the service that they receive, think of recently the state unemployment department or the Department of
Yeah.
Motor Vehicles that are inefficient. It takes forever to get, there's a lot of things you think you could do online that you can't. It's just really
Yeah.
frustrating people. And though, but I think at the root of that is those two agencies, they still are using one of these old 1970s, 1980s mainframes. The Veterans Affairs at the federal government, they're still largely a paper-based mainframe technology system. And these create, in a 2021 economy, they create huge public service impediments for those
Sure.
for the public, but they're also fabulously expensive to replace.
What's the blueprint for being able to get a system plan like this put together and funded, right? Because I imagine, these very large agencies they have big demands. So how do they get the money to do it?
Um, well, for like the EDD and for Department of Motor Vehicles, the legislature would have to allocate money in the budget. The
Okay.
project that we're building here in the assessor's office is going to be close to $100 million project over five
Okay.
over 5 years. The money probably would have been very difficult to get, but there were some conditions in the assessor's office 7 years ago that made it easier to get the board of supervisors to give us the authority to spend the money on
Okay.
this overhaul. But when you think about replacing the technology system for the Department of Motor Vehicles, you could be talking about a couple $100 million.
Oh,
And
yeah.
as you know, politicians would rather spend that money on a park, something they can see and put their name on, as opposed to
Right.
a technology platform that they may never be able to take credit for. However,
Yeah.
if I were a legislator, I think I'd be very motivated to want people to wait in line, shorter lines at the DMV.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If I could make their lives better through greater efficiency, that would definitely be the way to go. But I get it, right? Sometimes it's about how it looks, not how it feels.
But I,
So
I do believe that's fundamental to a lot of problems that we're having with a lot of big government agencies. Just their technological ability to respond to the demands, the service demands, just don't exist with their technology systems.
yeah, and it's interesting when you talk about having used an agile approach to development of the project. The beauty of agile is you fail quickly so that you could correct and move on. Where in the more traditional waterfall methods of doing project management, you have to develop something, get it all the way through to the end, only to find out it didn't work. And the agile is much better to get you there faster, and it winds up being cheaper in the long run. But it can be challenging to implement it from
It takes a little.
experience.
It may take a little bit more time because you're fixing things as they come up, but it also means
Hmm.
you're not fixing them at the end. And
Yeah.
it reminds me, you may recall back in the early 1980s when the American car companies were at an all-time low in terms of their quality, and Japanese cars were considered the
Yep.
gold standard, and they compared and contrasted the different assembly line models. In American cars, for every 1,000 cars that comes off the end of the assembly line, they had to fix 100
Mhm.
of them. Japanese only had to fix one or two of them because on the Japanese automotive assembly line, any employee of any rank had the authority to shut down the line to fix the
Yep.
problems to ensure that the cars coming off at the other end were of the quality
Yeah.
that they expected. The American lines may move faster, but you get more garbage in, garbage out.
Yep. Yep. I worked for a company back in the 80s, as a matter of fact, that was very into total quality awareness and the Deming's techniques for how to manage production, which is, ironically enough, came out of economists in the United States, but landed in Japan after World War II when the Japanese economy was destroyed and needed to kind of be built from scratch. They adopted these new ideas, and that's what got them so far ahead of us. And then we just ran to catch up
Right.
with a lot of that kind of thing. Cool.
Including on that point, I think that's what we're kind of seeing with the different development approach, agile versus waterfall, in terms of technology, at least for government applications.
Yeah. I love the idea of seeing incremental progress on something and failing early so that you can correct quickly and not lose, not spend 3 years doing something and
Right.
then find out at the end that you don't have the right requirements and everything is bad. That's the worst.
Our project did get slowed down a bit because of a hiring freeze and due to COVID. We didn't have the resources, but in general, I always tell anybody who asks is that our technology project, if this was a road construction project, I would say we are on time and on budget, which is kind of a rarity in government, it seems.
Yeah. How do you feel about the next 6 months? They feel good. They feel you don't know yet.
The surgence of the Delta variant created was a bit of a surprise. Everybody thought things were returning to some sense of normality, but now we know that there are different variants that could come up that could throw a wrench into the machinery. However,
Mm-hmm.
things are opening up a bit. We're trying to return to some sense of normalcy in small steps, agile approach, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
in terms of the core function of our office, assessing the value of property, it appears as though that the real estate market in the county is relatively strong. In fact, this year, countywide, property values increased just under 4%. Last year,
Mm-hmm.
they grew just over 6%. So it's not a huge variation. And the last time we had a
Okay.
recession, and we are in a COVID-induced recession, but last time
Right.
property values went down. And this time, residential properties increased roughly 20% year over year due to COVID,
Well.
um, primarily because of a lack of inventory and historically low mortgage rates. There was a lot of bidding wars during COVID. In fact, just
Right.
today's LA Times talked about how the median sales price of a house is approaching $1 million. There were a couple places where property was negatively impacted. That business personal
Yeah.
property, the furniture, equipment, and machinery, that actually had a negative growth rate this year. Hotels, which are
Yeah.
all closed,
Yeah.
will probably be negatively impacted. A lot of restaurants, retail, gyms, where they
Yeah.
weren't open. But countywide, against all property types, it was a positive growth. Along that line, I mentioned that the value of all assessed property is 1.7 trillion. That generates
Yeah.
$17 billion in property taxes for schools, cities, and county services, and it pays for things like police and public hospitals and
Yeah.
roads and libraries.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
a lot of local government schools were concerned about COVID and the pandemic and its impact on their revenues. So the fact that property values maintained positive growth created a bit of a floor for to ensure that those vital public services aren't going to be overly impacted by the COVID recession.
So I'm curious your opinion on this. How do you see the changeover of people working more remotely and that being possibly the new normal for a lot of businesses affecting the business real estate market in the city?
There was an assumption at the beginning of COVID, as everybody sent their employees to telework, that a lot of
Mm-hmm.
office space that they wouldn't return to the office space once they got used to having their employees work from home. Because a lot of them found,
Right.
I've talked to business owners who said they they find this environment it's productive. They didn't lose anything, and they don't have to spend thousands of dollars a month on Class A office space. And we
Right.
expected there to be a lot of vacancies. We thought that was going to have, in turn, a negative impact on property values for a lot of these office buildings. But now that
Yeah.
things are getting better, they do seem in large part returning to those offices. We're not seeing
Okay.
the numbers stay home that we thought was possible. However, I do believe
Okay.
there is going to be. I think there is a new normal. I think there will be a much more robust teleworking component throughout the
Yeah.
economy. Uh, and particularly in where I work in government, those were not things that were commonly done in government. Government's usually
Yeah.
slow to do things differently, but I suspect that we're going to continue seeing that with county
Yeah.
government, or at least for another year, and perhaps.
Yeah, I know that on my team that I work with, we did a lot of hiring during the last several months, and 3/4 of my guys aren't even in Southern California.
Yeah.
We're able to work remotely. Some of them work night shift kind of thing. They would never come into an office anyway. So we've kind of gotten used to that as the way our world's going to work going forward. So okay. I guess the only other question I've got, and I don't know if you're the right guy to ask it, but I'm just curious about your opinion on it, is how do property values, especially, well, it's throughout the whole state, right? And the way they impact like homelessness. And do you see there anything out on the horizon that adjusts so that there's a tier of property out there that can be made into, more affordable housing to take care of people?
We're really on those issues. You're really getting into the issues of housing policy, which is outside
Okay.
my jurisdiction. If you think of the assessor's
Okay.
office, I'm really like the engineer on a train shoveling coal into the engine. My job is to shovel
Hmm.
as much coal in there as possible. The guy driving the train is the one who's responsible for all the decisions. My job is to
Right.
make sure that everything that should be on the tax rolls is on there, and that the government is able to derive the property taxes revenues that they're entitled to, so they can make the biggest impact on those policy decisions on homelessness and on affordable housing. Um,
Okay.
yeah, under California, under Prop 13, property taxes are 1% of the market value at the time of sale or transfer. That's for all
Right.
property for whatever income levels are. I've not heard of anybody seriously challenging that approach to taxation.
Okay. How's your family holding up through all of this?
Well, I was married to a band director who had a very difficult time trying to teach band from Zoom for the
Yeah.
last year, but we've
Yeah.
been in good health and got a lot of home projects taken care of during the.
Good. Good. Very good. I have a music education student at Cal State Long Beach who also spent the last year and a half doing classes and working from home. And I understand the challenge of being a musician who can't come into contact with other musicians.
Yeah.
So
It's a group thing.
yeah, absolutely. Terrific. Is there anything you'd like me to share with
So
the audiences?
I have a couple little loose ends that I always like to tell people that when they think about our office, things that will, if you own property, that you want to know about. So people ask me all the time, they said, when does my property get reassessed? And the answer is, it
Mhm.
doesn't. We determine the value of your property at the time you purchase it, and the most your assessment will ever go up is 2%. That's what the law says, maximum of 2%. But then they'll say, but my
Okay.
property tax bill went up 20%. Then it wasn't, in those cases, it wasn't your property taxes. When you get your property tax bill, it usually has 15 or 20 different items on there.
Yeah.
Only one of them is property taxes. The rest of our special assistance for assessments for roads, libraries, parks, those are not property taxes, but they're billed on your property tax bill. Um,
Okay.
the times that your property tax might go up is if you do new construction, or if you add somebody or delete somebody from the deed. So if you build an ADU or add a pool where there wasn't one before, then your assessment will
Mhm.
change. Um,
Do you come out to look at those things when you reassess, or do you just do it from the
um,
permits?
they sometimes they'll do a drive by, sometimes they'll schedule appointments, so they'll go look at it. But we still do generally need to put eyeballs on it to see what the construction is.
Okay.
Another big issue that comes up all the time is that's really important for people to know is that what to do upon the death of a property owner. So if we're talking about residential property, the law says that you need to notify my office within 150 days of the death of a property owner. If you don't do so, that could in particular, if it's a home that you're inheriting, it could complicate your inheritance. And under a new law called Proposition 19, allows you to inherit your parents' property, or in some cases your grandparents' property, but you have to fill out a form, and Prop 19 form. And if you don't tell us, one, that there's been a death of a property owner by filing that form, and then filing the other form saying you're going to inherit the property, which will allow you to keep the low tax base, then you're going to get reassessed, you're going to get a supplemental bill, you're going to call out our office and be angry and say, I thought I don't get reassessed when my parents die. And we're going to say, well, you don't unless if you do things right. And but a lot of people just don't know what the right things are. And the way that you find out information about that is on our website, which is assessor.lacounty.gov.
And that was what I was about to ask you. Where can I point people to find out more about you and to find out more about what the assessor's office is doing and to get info? So I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. It's really glad to have the opportunity to visit with you. I know that your visitors were hoping for a riveting and exciting conversation, and who better than the county property tax assessor?
I thought you would be a fascinating person to have on for the conversation, specifically because we deal with your office pretty much every day of our lives in some way or another, and nobody knows how it really works. So I thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to talk to me, and good luck with the election next year.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity.
With more than a year in on the relief valve, I've spoken with folks from all kinds of businesses, and through their generous sharing, I've come to understand much more about the world around me. Now, I'm greedy, and I want to learn more all the time. And I'm also trying to figure out what the new normal is shaping up to be, which is ultimately a product of all of our visions combined. I'm always looking for people to talk with for the podcast. Everyone has interesting stories in their lives, and I want to know about what makes you who you are and what your vision for the future is. So, if you're interested in sharing, drop me a line at jrock, JROCK, at jnrprod, jnrprod.com, and let's chat.